God's story, Paul and Silas. So part of God's story is about two men named Paul and Silas, and it goes like this. Paul and Silas were friends who decided they wanted to serve God. Serving is when we help others by putting their needs before our own, and we do it because Jesus served and loved us. Serving can be as easy as holding open a door or saying something kind to a friend. It could also be giving your money, time, or things to people who need it. Paul and Silas wanted to serve God by telling others all about God's love and how Jesus came to rescue the world from sin. One day, Paul and Silas were in a city called Philippi. Some of the people there didn't want to hear about God's story, and they got really mad at Paul and Silas for telling the story every single day. They got so mad, in fact, that they beat up Paul and Silas right in the middle of the streets. Then they threw them in jail. Now remember, Paul and Silas were just trying to tell them about God, and now they had been put in prison. Once they were in jail, you might think Paul and Silas got scared to keep serving God, but they didn't. In fact, they wanted to worship God. Worship is showing God we love Him because He's the most important thing. It can be playing an instrument, singing, praying, listening, being generous, and loving our neighbor. These are all great ways to show God how much you love Him. Anyway, Paul and Silas decided to worship by singing songs to God. They sang so loud the whole jail could hear. It was like having a dance party in prison. Kind of weird, huh? Sometimes you might look weird when you're serving others or worshiping God, but that's okay. Because what matters most is not what other people think, but what God thinks. Well, God was with Paul and Silas, and right in the middle of their worship dance party, a huge earthquake began to shake the whole jail. All the doors swung open, and the chains fell right off the wrist of every single prisoner. They were free! So what do you think Paul and Silas did? Well, they knew that if they ran away, the jail guard would be punished for losing his prisoners. Paul and Silas didn't want that to happen, so they decided to stay in jail, even though the doors were open. When the earthquake was over, the guard thought he was in big trouble. He felt more sad than he ever felt in his whole life. But suddenly, Paul yelled out, "We're still here! Nobody's run away!" The guard was so surprised and happy that he invited Paul and Silas over for dinner and to spend the night. It might seem weird that the guard was gonna get in big trouble if the prisoners were gone, and then he took them home with him, but that's what he did. The guard's family was so happy he didn't get into trouble that they listened to Paul and Silas tell God's story. And because the story is such good news, the family decided they wanted to be a part of God's story too. Paul and Silas were allowed to go home the next morning. They knew now that serving God would be hard sometimes, but they decided that even if people were going to get mad at them, beat them up, send them to jail again, or worse, they would keep serving God by telling His story. And that's the story of Paul and Silas. So in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Paul and Silas were friends. They wanted to serve God. They told people God's story. Some people didn't want to hear it. Those people threw Paul and Silas in jail. Paul and Silas weren't scared. They had a dance party to worship God. God opened the jail doors with an earthquake. Paul and Silas stayed to tell the jail guard about God. They kept serving God. And that's a part of God's story.